For the next chapter of my story, I chose a new background because this is where my life got rocky and where I found more of my dark side. So here we go. There was actually a big dark side to the little church that we went to, which was like a good percentage of it was our family. And I haven't really said a lot about the people in my family yet, but this is where the story gets more chronological and has more to do with the specific people in my life. So, my parents, my mom and her sister were married to my mom to my dad, obviously, but then his adopted brother married my mom's biological sister. Now, just think about that for a second. It's not weird, but brothers married sisters, and so me and my brother and sister and our cousins on my mom's side of the family was also my cousins on my dad's adopted side of the family, which I've also said that the adopted family was who I knew as my family and spent more time with as a kid than anyone else. So they were my double cousins, and I call them my double cousins um, because they were my cousins on the only ones who were my cousins on my mom and my dad's side. And so my siblings and I and our cousins, it was a very it was psychologically abusive and in other ways abusive situation. And I'm not going to go into that a lot because to me my story is not about my trauma. It's about other things. It's about where my story has gone and is going. but but it's an important part of the story. So uh, we kids lived in this kind of make believe world that we made up together, and it had several different versions, uh, but we kind of lived in those make believe worlds we made up to play in together. And of course, back then we didn't have smartphones, and we were all homeschooled, so we didn't have other kids. We just had each other, and uh, so so yeah, that was a pretty big deal to me. And we moved away from Salmon, Idaho, as a big family group in in early 2000 because of church problems. And we kids didn't understand what the church problems were. But we moved to a new place, Flagstaff, Arizona, where then those same church problems just played out further, and there was another big blow up and another big church split. So it's like, okay, something was not right here. Something was, but I stayed in my make believe world at this time and didn't really understand or didn't try to understand what was going on. But I became more personally compromised because I was getting older, and you just can't help it. Can't help seeing more of the adult world. And I mentioned before baptism, and baptism was a scary thing to me because we were taught that children they're born innocent and they live out their childhood innocently, free of sin, because they don't really know what they're doing when they do wrong, so it doesn't count as sin. But at some point, you don't know when you sin. No one can tell you when that is. No one can tell you when you intentionally doing naughty things goes from you just being a kid to you sinning. No one can tell you when that is. But when it happens, you have now sinned. You are now headed to hell. And unless you are baptized um, properly, you're hopeless. But there's another problem, and that is that if you if we don't baptize children, no, because children don't understand this. They need to be actual sinners first to understand what they're doing. So If you're baptized too early, it didn't count because you didn't really know what you were doing. And if you're baptized too late, you risk dying and going to hell before you could make it to the water. So baptism was terrifying. And was a big part of some of my biggest trauma was surrounding baptism. Um, I had my stomach tied in knots for years because of worrying after I was baptized more than before. Because when we moved to this new church, we were under kind of it was because my grandpa had taken this new preaching job, and so we were all supposed to be the shiny, sparkly preacher's family. And I doubt if he'll ever watch this, but if he does, well, nothing I could say could really convince him of this. But I love him a lot. He's precious to me. But we had to be his perfect family, and so I became under pressure to be baptized. And my cousin, whose house I'm staying in right now, at the same time, we were like the same age, and at the same time, we and my older sister got pressured to be baptized. And I wasn't comfortable with it. I wasn't ready yet. I was scared of the whole baptism thing, but I did it because I was scared. And I mean, I cared about God. I cared about Jesus. I loved Jesus. I always had. But the thing is, I knew deep down that when I was baptized, that would mean that there was this schism in my relationship with God that was really hard to put your finger on. And for the adults around me, didn't seem to be something that they were doing really well with. I didn't want to move from my state of innocent childhood connection with God to this adult state of always battling with your sin for the rest of your life and not really being sure how it's going to turn out. But I was baptized, and then I actually just kind of forgot about that, went back into my fantasy world. But then the church blow up happened, and then very shortly after that, my great grandma, who I haven't mentioned, but she was the oldest person in our family, the adopted side of the family, but was my great grandma. Really magical, really wonderful person, just this ancient, wonderful woman, and she died, and she was the last thing holding all of us together, and then so my cousins then moved away, and they had lived other places before, but it had been a long time. We'd been small children the last time that we lived somewhere separate, so they moved away somewhere back in Idaho, and we stayed there in Arizona, in the desert, which was starting to feel more and more like a desert to me. And now I didn't have, the comfort of me and my siblings. We didn't have the comfort of our cousins there. We made other friends. That was a positive, but it just became a scary new, stark new world. And I just had to see myself as this person who had now admitted that I'm a sinner who is separate from God, and I'm now in the complicated adult world. And that's when I was 11. Oh, another key experience, important experience to me when I was 11 was, one, living with a partially Mexican family. The mom was Mexican. Her family was over all the time, so that was a big cultural experience. That was great. In Flagstaff, the Navajo and Hopi are a big presence, and at their house, because that's where we lived for a few months when we first moved there, a friend was over, like a Navajo family, and a little girl in their family was saying something about some kind of creature that she believed in that like jumped through a window at night or something. And she was a few years younger than me, and and I laughed at her and made fun of her about it, and her feelings seemed a little hurt. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I just I just ridiculed someone for what they believe in, and I felt terrible, and I resolved never to do that again. Oh, and I noticed when I re-listen to my videos, sometimes I slur my words. I'm going to try to do better about that. But I realized that even a little girl believing in a certain kind of creature that her people have traditionally believed in, that she may or may not have seen one night, that I had to respect that. And I couldn't and didn't want to laugh about it. That it was actually something special. It was part of who she was. And so there's that. Um, it took me off track from something I was going toward there. But anyway, there in Flagstaff, I got more into science. I just got more into my books. I got more into um, Christian evidences, but really just mostly I just got more into escaping in video games and just anything I could do to keep from thinking about spiritual things, which were the most, had always been the most important to me, but now were the most traumatic. And especially when an adult who visited our home church, because now, we were too good for any other church, so we were just meeting at my grandparents' home, and a visitor expressed the concern that maybe she didn't know what she was doing when she was baptized when she was younger. And interestingly enough, my grandpa answered that she really, ought not to worry about that too much. But that made me think, oh my goodness, I wish she had not said that. It had not occurred to me before, not explicitly, that maybe you could accidentally have been baptized invalidly. And so from then on, I was terrified that I was going to hell because maybe I didn't really know what I was doing and was just pressured into being baptized. And so that that was that was a big part of the next few years. At this point, I was like 13. I think of turning 14 as the time when I woke up out of the dream that was, sometimes dark but very dreamy of being a child, that I permanently woke up out of that dream into the stark adult world, and there didn't seem to be much comfort. And our uncle had been staying with us for a while, and then he moved into his own place, but we still spent a lot of time with him. It was one of my adopted uncles, and he was going down a really dark path because of because of a lot of these things. And his way of coping with it had been to get into our Celtic origins more, and to get into just fantasy, and to get into like gothic stuff, and witchcraft and sorcery, and to an extent. And we and he kind of got us interested in all that with him, maybe not to the level that he was, but my sister more than anyone else, but all of us to different levels. We got into this kind of dark phase with him, and we're kind of really like love hate with ourselves about it, because we all knew that we were wrong for it, but we all were just in this really bad place where we needed to escape, and so we went down kind of this path of the dark and fantastical, just about right up until we and until just after we moved away from Arizona to Texas, which is where the next part of the story continues.